with
Do you not love fish? Do you not care about fish? Why don't you pinch your barbs?
If you don't believe that, grab a barbed hook and stick it in your arm and then try to pull it out.
80% of it, what it boils down to for guys when they choose to go barbless, all the reasons I read is reasons that benefit the fisherman. They're not so much concerned about the fish, although they say they are.
There's a place to save money when you're buying gear, and there's a place to spend money when you're buying gear.
I believe it.
I can't believe that this was a professional charter and this guy didn't maintain sharp hooks. All right, folks, you are tuning into the Gritty Angler podcast, and I'm here with Jason from Drop Jaw Flies.
Yeah.
Good to have you back on, man.
Thank you. It's kind of like deja vu. It's like we've done this before, haven't we?
Maybe once or twice. But the cool thing is each podcast we do, you show up with more and more cool flies, and so...
Tells you what I've been doing.
Just a few minutes ago, we were talking about some cool trips we're going to take this year, or at least we're hoping to take. Yellowstone, maybe Pyramid, maybe Chile. No, not really.
But maybe Chile.
Well, we have a long wish list, but definitely I think Yellowstone and Pyramid are doable for sure. Nice thing is where we live, those are within a day drive.
Super fortunate. Well, Yellowstone's about 6 hours.
Yeah.
Pyramid's 8.
Yeah. But yeah, and the reason kind of those two came up, Pyramid and Yellowstone, is because both of those you can only fish barbless hooks. And what we're going to talk about today, guys, is the pointy end of these flies, the hook, which really is probably the most important part of a fly. A sharp hook, a good hook, one that doesn't bend out or break.
Yeah. It's like the foundation of a house. You gotta have a strong foundation.
Ouch, yeah.
Still sharp?
That one's still sharp.
You have some pliers handy just in case we accidentally...
Yeah, we've had...
You have a history, right?
Although I haven't hooked myself in the last year, so I'm getting better. But definitely when it comes to the barb versus barbless debate, we'll get into that. But when you do hook your skin, you're kind of wishing that you'd had a barbless hook on there.
Oh, man. Because
the barbs do their job.
They do. They do work. They do serve a purpose.
Yeah.
They're good at hooking and staying in flesh. Let's say in flesh.
They work. And there's a reason that 99% of hooks out there are made with the barb. Getting back into that barb versus barbless debate, but the barb works.
Barb does work.
But the reason I wanted to chat with you, Jason, about hooks is because you play with hooks every day. So I wanted to ask you, when a guy is shopping for a hook, and obviously the style, a lot of the style depends on what kind of fishing you're going to be doing. But what do you look for when you go shopping for hooks, or why do you buy the hooks that you buy for your streamer tying business?
It's a good question, and especially as it pertains to drop jaw flies and the heads that we use. You know that the hook has to be able to have enough gap once you put the head on to be effective. Because when you use these heads, and of course there's different sizes, once you put the head over the hook, if there's not enough gap or clearance to hook a fish, it's not useful. It's no good. Even it could be the sharpest hook, it could be a great strength, you know, great longevity as far as the point's concerned. But first thing I have to do is make sure that it's compatible with the head that I'm going to use it for. So that'd be the first thing.
And so you're talking size, making sure you get the size right for the fly you're going to tie.
Exactly. So, and as it pertains to the drop jaw fly heads, it's got to have enough clearance from the hook point and underneath to be useful to gap. And I'm usually going to look for a minimum of 1/4 of an inch there.
Okay.
But the other thing, if it's a short hook, and I need to put some body back behind the head, it's got to have enough length to look right. It's got to be proportional. So those are the first two things that I'm going to gauge when I select a hook. Is one, is it going to work with the head I'm about to use, and is it going to be long enough for the look that I'm going for?
The hook shank, yeah.
So those are the very first two things. If it doesn't qualify and meet those specs, then It's just not going to work.
And for guys newer to tying, and not all companies use the same numbers for size, right? So, say you buy a Daiichi number 2, well, a Gamakatsu number 2 might be a different size hook, and so you got to pay attention to that, right?
Definitely.
Which is so confusing. I wish they would just standardize it, right?
Yeah, fat chance of that, you know, because I have bought all kinds of hooks, and just like you're saying, I bought a lot of number 2s or 2/0, 2 different sizes of hooks or whatever.
Yeah.
And when you get them and you want to try and use them, tie one fly with one hook, tie the same fly with a different brand of hook in the same size, and it doesn't work very good. So you've got to really do some research and, you know, figure out what works best for the fly or the design that you're going for.
So when it comes to picking a hook, do you have some favorite manufacturers of hooks, companies that you prefer to use, and if so, why?
Yeah, and that's a good question. There's so many good hook companies out there, manufacturers making good quality hooks. But I think once you pick out a hook and you tie a fly with it and you're successful with it, there's really no reason to change other than maybe you're curious or whatever. So if we take the Baby Whitey, and this is a mini Baby Whitey, traditionally it's tied with the Tiemco 8089 in the number 2 for the head hook, and then in the back it's usually a number 10 or a number 6. It just depends on the size. But this particular Baby Whitey is a mini, and it's tied on Gamakatsu B10S. The 8089 though, it's that light wire, and it gets great penetration, and it holds the hook point really well. So here's some of the things that I would look for the Baby Whitey. Great hook gap on the 8089, that O'Shaughnessy bend type of a curve, and it's a light color. So as you look at it this way, if that matters to the fish at all, it's harder for them to see it, I believe. But like I said, we don't really know if the fish care or not.
Right.
So also, it's a really fine wire, and so when you go to set the hook, it's really easy for it to penetrate into a fish's mouth. Now they are spendy, but for that light wire that you get, it's very hard to bend those out in fishing, and so it meets a lot of needs. Also, in that number 2, if you buy the number 2, it will work great for a mini trout head, and it can work all the way up to a chub head. This is a number 2, and there's still enough gap there. So if I buy that number 2 size, or I can use it for a lot of different flies.
So when you say they're spendy, I mean, what are you paying for? What are you getting in a hook that costs more versus another?
That's a good question too, because now there's hooks out that are basically do the same things as that.
Yeah.
For that hook, but I really, one thing that we could test is how easily they bend out. Most of the hooks in that size, you're just not going to bend them for most trout situations. So if we do find a more cost-effective fly or hook, I mean, it's probably worth looking into that.
Yeah, I think really what guys should pay attention to is hooks that are like a carbon steel.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they all used to be, or a lot used to be stainless steel, but carbon steel, it's a stronger steel, and I think they tend to stay sharper longer.
And that is another huge point, is you're going to dull it. Like I said, you're going to dull it eventually. But if it's really good steel, then you can resharpen it, and it will hold its point longer. Because you tie an expensive fly like this, and you dull the hook on the first cast, you gotta be able to resharpen it, or else it's no good. Whoops, sorry. That's a permanent. It's barbed, so it's not coming out of the carpet, man.
You just toss that. You don't want that fly, huh?
But yeah, the good steel, you've got to have that, and especially when you're selling flies like we do. If they're not quality hooks, then why bother?
Oh, 100%. I mean. Yeah, you're never going to get a hook, I don't think, as sharp as they come from the factory, because all the factory hooks these days, or at least most of the good ones, are either laser sharpened or chemical sharpened.
Yeah. I don't carry those chemicals with me on the river. It's just don't have a laser either.
What? In that big pack of yours?
I should. Might as well.
Yeah. No, you're never going to get them as sharp as they come from the factory, but you still can resharpen them to where they're dang sharp, and you can do the fingernail test.
Yes. When we were talking about sizes a little bit ago, one of the most common questions I get about that is, what size of hook do you use for the juvenile trout? And that's one place where I'd have to go away from the number 2 in the Tiemco 8089 because it's just not big enough. It doesn't go back far enough past the gill plate.
So the shank's not long enough?
The shank's not long enough, and there's not enough gap here because this is such a tall head.
Yeah.
So in this case, what you'd want to do is match up a hook that'll give you enough gap here and have enough length back here to achieve the profile on how in the length.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, it's a number 5 worm hook from Owner. And that seems to work out the best. So we've caught fish on this fly, or
oh yeah,
flies like it. And that hook, you're not bending that hook out.
No, you need one like that for all those 20-pounders we catch.
That's right. So anyway, that's an example of sizing the hook to the head. And if you weren't using heads, obviously a lot of people don't, you still need to build your fly around that hook and make sure it has enough gap.
Now you've mentioned Gamakatsu, Tiemco, Owner. Name a couple other companies that are great, that make great hooks.
So feel that hook right there. Now that is a cheap brand, but tell me what you think about that point.
Yeah, that's freaking sharp.
That is super sharp, and that is like a cheaper brand, but a quality brand. It's a Mizuno. Brand hook, and they are extremely sharp. They're not quite, the steel is not quite as strong as some of the other brands, but if I'm just messing around and I'm tying a fly for me, I will use those a lot just because they're good to experiment with. They're super sharp.
So I was doing a little research this morning on hooks, and I just did a search for the top rated brands out there. Consistently, the top 10 that I'm seeing out there are Gamakatsu, Daiichi. A lot of reviews keep saying Daiichi, or at least Daiichi claims to be the sharpest points out there.
We have flies on Daiichi too. That's a great one. I also here's a couple new ones that relatively new would be this is the Fulling Mill, and then of course Stealth. Some of our pinheads are tied on this, and they're working on some new hooks
Stealth,
in the O'Shaughnessy band. And of course, Partridge is one that we use as well in some of the flies, and they're a great hook.
Yeah, Partridge consistently came up in the top 10. You got Eagle Claw. So if you're kind of partial to American-made, Eagle Claw is a U.S. company. They'd be a good selection for you.
Yeah, I mean, in this fly right here, I've got an Owner worm hook, and we've got an Eric's double, and I can't remember the name of that, but it's just a little double hook right there. And then we've got a Partridge universal. I think not actually, it's an Attitude in that particular fly. So as far as the brands go, there's a lot of great brands. And like you're saying, this huge trocar, 7/0 trocar right here, super pointy and sharp. That's a mean hook right there.
That looks like a shark hook right there.
Yeah, I'm sure you could probably use it for that. But
so a few other companies to consider: Mustad or Mustad, however you want to say that.
Yeah, I mean they have a couple. They have some very inexpensive lines, and they have a little bit better. I don't use them very much. I have in the past, but I don't use them for any of these flies. Mm-hmm. But Gamakatsu I do.
And then you got Hannock, Laser Trocar, and then VMC.
VMCs are great. I don't have a whole lot of use for them, but they are a great hook.
Yeah, so depending on what you're tying though, guys, whether, you know, you're into nymphs or dry flies, smaller streamers, any of those top 10 would be great choices. And then there's probably another 20 brands out there that you could choose from too.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a hook company and you want to test some of your hooks, send them our way, because we'll do it. I know Allen also is. I don't know if they manufacture, but they're branding hooks that are very affordable.
Yes.
So if guys want bulk or whatever, a really good tyer out of Canada, Nick Groves, he uses Allen a lot because as far as the Canadian exchange rate goes, the Allens, he can get those for great deals.
Oh yeah, and that exchange rate continues to climb in the favor of the U.S. right now.
Yeah. There's also, I can't remember if MFC company is putting out a new hook, but it's supposed to be very affordable. So you do want to get as much bang for your buck as possible, but when you're tying expensive flies, sometimes it's not worth it to go cheap. I mean, go with good steel, because like we just talked about, sharpening is a factor. Keeping that fly relevant and sharp.
You're not going to get a hook as sharp as it comes from the factory. So if I'm tying little dry flies or little nymphs, and you can make those for cheap, you know, I might just chuck it rather than try to resharpen it, right?
I probably would too.
But if you're tying expensive flies and you're buying bigger hooks like these, you want to make sure you get steel, like you said, Jason, that you can resharpen. Because you don't want to chuck this or lose this fly.
And you're going to blunt it. We have many times. And they do sharpen up sufficiently, either on the water or back at home. They sharpen up well enough that they're easily will penetrate whatever, you know, jaws, bones, whatever.
So how do you sharpen these?
So when I'm not going very far, and I'm just, you know, kind of locally or whatever, and weight is not an issue to pack, I have this battery operated Dremel tool, and I don't know if it has many speeds, not many, but it has quite a few speeds, and with the right tool attachment, the right grinding wheel on here, this is different than what I have on here, but I can just take that and very finely sharpen the hooks well enough, and quick too with this. Now, if I'm on a long hike somewhere, I'm not going to take this. This is a boat tool or just kind of a local where we go fish most often. I'll take this. But a diamond file would be the way to go in that case, and I have those too.
So with this Dremel tool, you like this better because it's easier, or do you think you can get a better point on the hook? So
the deal with this is I can hold that and my fly pretty much and get a clean angle on it. When you're dragging it across the file, sometimes you're doing as much damage unless you know what you're doing than you are sharpening. And it's just easier and quicker for me to use this. Some people might grind their fly right off. They might grind the hook point right off if they don't know how to use that too.
Well, a real small nymph or midge fly, yeah, maybe this isn't the ticket.
Yeah, that wouldn't be. Yeah.
Certainly for these bigger hooks, these big streamer hooks, I can see that this Dremel tool would be way handy.
Oh, for sure. With these bigger hooks and with the steel, with the bigger wire, this does a lot quicker job.
Now, when you're using the diamond tool, one direction, or how do you... I've seen guys kind of grind them back and forth, and I think, like you say, that does more damage than actually sharpening it.
Yeah, I will hold the file in my, and I'm right-handed, so I'll hold the file in my left hand, and then if I had one in front of me, I would take it and I would run the hook. I would brace my knuckle or whatever against the edge of the file, and then pull the hook towards me.
In one direction.
In one direction. And a lot of guys will go this way, but I just don't see, for me it's not as effective as if I pull it towards me. And then I'll do that on both sides and just run it, and then keep testing it or whatever. Let's test this one, Chad. You hold your arm out a little bit.
Can you debarb that first?
But I know this is a crazy test, but a lot of the really sharp hooks, they'll just so easily just stick right in.
Right on your cheek.
There's no I'm not doing any damage or whatever, but there's no pressure. I'm just hanging it there, and all the time they just stick. When they're that one might not be. Anyway, it seemed like the dull hooks that need to be sharpened just kind of slide off.
Right.
So. Yeah,
and same with your fingernail, right? The old fingernail test. You don't need any pressure, but if you can just hang it at like a 45-degree angle off your thumbnail, and if that hook stays there, then that's a good sharp hook.
A lot of the hooks that are not high quality, that will actually dull the point doing that on your
fingernail.
Yeah, the really good quality steel will, obviously that doesn't. But
now I've noticed we've got a big table of flies here, and some are brass colored, some are bronze. What's your opinion on that, Jason? Does the color of the hook matter?
In your mind, it might. We don't really know what the fish is assessing, or if they assess, if they care, if they don't care.
Yeah.
You kind of have to figure that out on your own. In my mind, I'm thinking that this light brass color from the TMCO, the 8089, the Mizunos, whatever, on a little fly up against a white belly, if fish do care, this is going to be harder for them to see.
Right.
The really dark, like the Gamakatsus or the Erics, the BMC, the owners, they have a really black nickel finish on them. People still catch all kinds of fish with them.
Yeah.
And then there's the bright chrome hooks, and we catch fish with those too. And then there's the hooks that are purposely colored red or a chartreuse or a green or a blue.
Yeah.
So
a lot of the bass guys like the red hooks.
Yeah. And so here's a super white belly, chartreuse sides with black hooks. I think this is going to get bit. And so
we know it will, because it has been bit. But.
So, yeah, I mean, that's just, who knows? If your area and our fishing, if we find something that works better that way, then we should use the hooks that work. You know?
I think I think you're right there. It depends on your area, your geography, what you're fishing for. If you find one that you're catching more fish on, I would use it. But I haven't read any studies. I've been on a lot of chat rooms and boards, and I've read guys' comments. There's no scientific studies that indicate color really matters. Whether it's saltwater, lakes, rivers.
Yeah, I think that if we just look at our fishing, for example, we have used chrome black and the light bronze color and been successful with all of them. So
yeah,
that is actually matters less to me than if it's compatible with the fly. If it has good hooking potential, and if they've got to be as sharp as possible.
Yeah, 100%.
The Gamakatsus, the B10S, for example, that's what's in this curved zip stick. The wire is pretty heavy, and so you can resharpen this a lot, and it's very strong. I think the Eric's hooks and the Predator hooks are also kind of from Partridge. They're also in that same category of quality. And there's probably just one or two hook manufacturers that are making hooks for all these companies. I don't know, but...
It makes you wonder. I mean, a lot of the best ones come from Japan.
Yeah.
And so if you're not opposed to buying hooks made from Japan, you can't go wrong, because they all rate really, really highly. TMCO, Gamakatsu, and Daiichi.
Daiichis are just fantastic hooks, and we use those quite a bit too.
Yeah. Now, Jason, you don't pinch any of your barbs. You sell all your drop jaw flies with barbs on them. You're a bad dude.
In some circles. I might have a PETA poster with darts.
Do you not love
it.
fish? Do you not care about fish? Why don't you pinch your barbs?
Well, I figure I'm going to sell the customers the flies with barbs, and they can pinch them down if they want to. I'm not going to take that away from the customer, because it's there for a reason. I mean, a barb does help keep the hook in the fish. And, just like we were talking earlier, if you don't believe that, grab a barbed hook and stick it in your arm and then try to pull it out.
Yeah. Yeah, and then tell me that's not more effective than
Yeah.
barbless.
And with the drop jaw flies, we're not going after the little teeny trout. We're going after big fish that have really hard mouths. And once you get one of those fish to commit and bite your fly, you want every advantage on your side to land that fish. Having a barb is one of those mechanisms that's going to help you land that fish. And so in my experience, I have killed fish before, but I don't know if that was from the barb or the hook penetration cutting an artery or cutting a vessel.
Yeah.
You don't know that. If you really cared about fish and their health, you wouldn't fish. Because even hooking a fish and playing it in the heat or the cold or whatever can be the demise of that fish, regardless of if it got hooked or something like that.
Yeah, like you say, if you don't want to hurt a fish, then don't go fishing and ram a sharp steel hook into its mouth, whether it has a barb or not. But I have read a lot of studies, and there's no conclusive study that says fishing with a barb causes more fatality in fish than fishing barbless.
Yeah.
It's just not conclusive, and there's no evidence that points one way or the other.
Right. I mean, the energy expenditure it takes as a fish to be fought and to be brought in could be worse than being hooked.
Yeah.
And what's worse, the damage of cutting a fish this way with a huge hook point or pulling it back out with the barb? They're both probably just as bad.
Yeah.
So my advice to guys that want to call up and argue about that is go buy a crochet hook and some yarn and take that up. Or there's a lot of hobbies that you can go do that will save the fish.
Yes.
I'm a fisherman. I realize that mortality is going to happen. Let's just be honest.
If it caused so much fatality to fish, manufacturers would probably start making less with barbs and more that are barbless.
Sure. How that pertains to catch and release is I'm more into the catching. I love to release the fish back. Sometimes I eat fish. That's just sometimes I do.
Yeah.
But the barb I have found is really has not been that big a deal. I can think of one fish I killed last year and one the year before. I cannot attribute that to the barb.
And those both tasted really good.
Yes, they did.
Now, I can see arguments both ways for barbless and barbed, and it depends on where your stance is and the style of fishing, where you're fishing, what you're fishing for. Are you catch and release, or do you like to eat a lot of fish? But a lot of the arguments I've heard are emotional responses. A lot surrounding hurting the fish, causing them, inflicting pain.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of studies, and most experts agree that the fish have very few nerve receptors around their mouth. And so the emotional response of you causing the fish pain isn't really a valid argument.
Yeah. You're going to go out and stick a fish with the hook and pull him out of the place where he wants to be and interrupt his feeding and his life by catching it and then worry about that there's a barb on the, it doesn't make sense once you really think about it.
No, and it certainly doesn't hurt as much as ramming it into your own finger.
Yeah. I think the case for barbless would be when you have kids with you, or maybe you're concerned about not hooking yourself, or if you do, getting the hook out, because there's some horrible pictures on the internet of people that have stuck themselves with trebles, and and even we've done it.
Yeah.
Barbs are effective, but let's go back really quick to the fish, Chad. Talking about the fish as it relates to barbs. Little fish, barbless hooks, I think, are the way to go. If you're in a river where there's a lot of little fish, pinch the barb down. Yeah.
High mountain stream, I have no issues fishing barbless because I'm not keeping those fish. A lot easier to get the hook out. Yeah. The mission, I believe, with drop jaw flies is to catch the biggest fish that you can, or at least be hunting for them. And when you do cross paths with one, you want to stick it and you want the hook to stick in, and that's why I think we use the barbs. But when you get the flies, pinch the barbs down if you want to. And
Yeah.
You know, again, reading on some of these chat rooms and message boards, conversations, guys having about barbed versus barbless, 80% of it, what it boils down to for guys when they choose to go barbless, all the reasons I read is reasons that benefit the fisherman. They're not so much concerned about the fish, although they say they are. But you get on there and you read that, guys, it's, well, when I hook myself, my finger, it's easier to get it out if it's barbless.
Yeah.
When the hook hooks my bootlace, my pant, it's easier to get the hook out if it's barbless.
Yeah.
When I snag the tree behind me on my back cast and I'd ram that hook into the branch, if it's a barb, it's harder to get out. All of them were reasons that benefit the angler and not so much the fish.
Yeah. I like barbs. Barbs are staying on.
The hook is the most important part of the fly.
Yeah.
So it's funny that probably my diamond file, a lot of guys' diamond file, is the least used tool, fishing tool that I have. And it should probably be the most used tool.
I definitely agree. If you get a hit and you didn't hook the fish up, when you finish your retrieve, pull that up and check it right away. And
yeah.
Even if you don't get a hit, check it throughout the day.
So what I've done, Jason, I've now attached my diamond file to my lanyard that I wear around my neck. I've got my nippers there. I've got my diamond file just to help me remember to check my hooks often and keep them sharp. So now I try to check them 2 or 3 times throughout the day and resharpen them as needed.
It's definitely a good thing to do, because when you get that, you feel that bite out there and you what happened? How come you didn't stick it? And it could be because your hook was blunted a little bit, the point.
You know, and another thing too, just switching gears here though, I've been on a few trips where I paid for guide service, and I went out on a chartered trip. In fact, last year I went down to Mexico. I was down there on an anniversary trip with my wife, and it was so hard not to take my fly rod and my fly gear, but
you didn't do it?
I didn't want to impose fishing time on an anniversary trip.
I got it.
So I wanted it to be a good week for both of us. But one day we're walking down on the pier, and my wife, and that's where all the charters take off out of, and my wife says, "Hey, why don't we go fishing for half a day?" And she knew I really wanted to, right?
Way to go, Lisa. That's awesome.
Yes. So anyhow, we did that. And I couldn't find, we just had a little half-day trip, and I couldn't find anybody that had fly rods down there. This is in Cabo.
Gotcha.
And so we just went out with a guy that had spin gear, which is fine because I got to go chase roosters and everything else with spin tackle. But long story short, the very first hookup I had on the day was like nothing I'd ever felt before. I mean, it was a big fish, and I knew it was a big fish. And I fought him for 5 minutes, and he got off.
Oh.
And I was just heartbroken. But to that point, I hadn't thought to look at the hooks. And so when I reeled that up, I looked at the hook, and Jason, it was the most dull thing you'd ever seen in your life.
I believe it.
I can't believe that this was a professional charter, and this guy didn't maintain sharp hooks. And so I don't know for sure, but to this day, I think that's the reason that fish maybe got off.
Probably, man.
Because I don't think, with how dull that hook was, I don't think it penetrated that fish's mouth at all.
Yeah.
I don't think it went in a millimeter.
Probably did, man. Probably came out because of that. And you could almost bet, easily bet, and win money on that's the cause of you lost your fish.
Yeah. But my point is, I mean, this is a professional guide, or this is his livelihood anyhow, but even he doesn't think to maintain sharp hooks. I think it's just something we don't think about unless you make a conscious effort to do it.
Yeah, I just wonder about some of those guys thinking that Americans don't know what they're doing, and they don't want to have to dig that out of one of their customers or something. I have no clue, but you got to maintain that hook point. I mean, the whole thing of fishing is the hook. We're just putting crap on there to make it enticing to the fish, but it's got to get in there and stay there. And
yeah, I mean, obviously it takes time to do it and maintain it. Not a lot of time, but a little bit of time. And you want your fly in the water as much as possible, as long as possible, because you're not going to catch a fish if your fly's not in the water. But you also might not catch that fish if your hook's not sharp.
Yeah, And there probably is a lot of guys that don't have a system of resharpening their hooks or keeping them sharp. So I think that's one of the recommendations we'd have, is to go and get yourself a diamond file. They don't cost that much money, but they can save that situation when you do cross paths with the monster. He eats your fly and you go to set the hook, or you do get it stuck in there, but it comes out because you didn't get a good enough penetration or whatever. You're going to want a sharp hook. So these work, they're heavy and expensive, but a diamond file, you learn how to use one and you're set.
100%.
Yeah.
So guys, do that. Make sure if you don't own one, get a diamond file, have it someplace easily accessible while you're fishing on the water so you don't lose that big one. Make sure you can stick them solid. So
stick them solid.
Thanks for coming on, man. Guys, thanks for listening, and stay gritty.
Although our native trout species are resilient fish, they are facing an uphill battle. Historically, there were 28 species of trout that lived in our waters, but 3 of those are extinct. According to Trout Unlimited's research, 13 of the remaining 25 species occupy less than 25% of their historic range. 6 are listed as either threatened or endangered. Renowned conservationist Shane Mahoney recently said, quote, "The natural resources in our country is what makes our country so great. We can have mountains and we can have streams and we can have forests, but if there's nothing living in them, they're meaningless." I agree. Let's not forget that our right to fish depends on habitat. Let's be good stewards of our fisheries and fight to protect and preserve our public lands. Our wildlife habitat depends on it.